Accused of playing God with people's lives, a breast cancer surgeon faces jail after carrying out completely unnecessary operations. Ian Paterson has been convicted of wounding with intent after convincing patients they needed treatment.
To feel like I've been mutilated, all this was for nothing. All the scars I thought were there because they were a badge of honour, and now because he has mutilated me.
The NHS has already paid out nearly £18 million in damages to more than 250 patients. A fellow cancer surgeon says he can't believe what he did.
It's distressing to even think about it, that someone would deliberately mislead a patient and submit them to effectively deforming surgery for no good reason.
Concerns were first raised about Ian Paterson more than 20 years ago. We'll be asking how he was able to continue operating for so long. Also tonight, police say they've foiled an active terrorist plot in northwest London. A woman was shot during the armed raid. 6 people have been arrested. The UK economy slows. Latest figures suggest consumers are reining back spending in the face of rising inflation. A rapturous welcome for President Trump on the eve of his 100th day in office. We'll be asking voters what they've made of him so far. And face-to-face, Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko square up ahead of what's being described as the biggest fight in British boxing history.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, defending champion Mark Selby is on the table tonight, continuing his World Championship semi-final against Ding Junhui.
Good evening. A breast cancer surgeon has been found guilty of carrying out completely unnecessary operations at private and NHS hospitals in the West Midlands. Nottingham Crown Court heard that 59-year-old Ian Paterson lied to patients and exaggerated or invented the risk of cancer to convince them to go under the knife. The charges related to 9 women and 1 man, but there are hundreds of other victims. Police say it's still not clear why he did it. He was bailed today and will be sentenced next month. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson reports.
Surgeon Ian Paterson, described as charismatic and charming, but who lied to his patients in order to deliberately wound them on the operating table, pretending they were at risk of cancer when they were not. Today, some of his victims who thought the surgeon was saving their lives showed their relief after the jury at Nottingham Crown Court found Paterson guilty of 17 counts of deliberately harming patients.
I've been left physically damaged. I feel like I've been mutilated. All this was for nothing. All the scars I thought were there because they were a badge of honour, and now because he has mutilated me. And, you know, I've been through this for nothing.
Paterson was also found guilty of 3 counts of unlawful wounding, but why he did it remains a mystery. So you're convinced, are you, that this was him trying to play God in a way with patients' lives?
Well, that's the way that some of the patients have described his actions. As I say, I really don't know what his true motivation was. Certainly financial motivation is something that's featured during the investigation and the trial. But unless he tells us what his motivation was, we'll never know.
During the trial, the jury heard how Ian Paterson told patients they needed to have lumps or entire breasts removed, but expert witnesses told the court the risk was non-existent or greatly exaggerated, and that no reasonable surgeon would have acted in the way Paterson did. One of those experts was Professor Philip Drew, who says he's been deeply affected by the evidence he examined.
I can't understand it. It's distressing to even think about it, that someone would deliberately mislead a patient and submit them to effectively deforming surgery for no good reason.
Professor Drew had previously met Paterson and says he seemed warm and credible, and that patients had thought him wonderful. It made him think of another notorious doctor.
Shipman was bizarre. I mean, and Paterson is bizarre in that they both were deliberately harming people. And again, I think you have to understand the whole mindset of the medical profession is that is so wrong that it doesn't even occur to you that it would happen. It's just so wrong. I mean, so I think both of them demonstrated some degree of almost psychopathic approach to the care for their patients.
This case revolved around Patterson's work at 2 private hospitals in the West Midlands, at Spire Little Aston in Sutton Coldfield and Spire Parkway in Solihull. He also worked as a surgeon at the NHS-run Solihull Hospital, where he treated hundreds more patients. The 9 women and 1 man whose treatment was at the centre of the case here were chosen from a sample group of around 200 patients, but we may never know the true number of those harmed by Patterson. Over a long career in the private sector and the NHS, he treated thousands of patients. One of them, Francis Perks, underwent a series of operations, including a mastectomy, all of them unnecessary.
How can anybody in their right mind, how can they do that to people? I just find it unbelievable. And how he's made us all suffer, and people as well who've lost their lives. It's pure evil to me, pure evil.
The news of the guilty verdict came this afternoon as some of the women treated by the surgeon attended a fundraiser for cancer patients. Their relief was clear. Patterson left court today with his daughters after being granted bail before sentencing next month. But the man who mutilated so many has been warned he's likely to face a prison sentence. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News, Nottingham Crown Court.
Ian Patterson's conviction came more than 20 years after concerns were first raised about his operating practices. He was suspended by one hospital as long ago as 1996, only to find employment with another NHS trust. Our health editor Hugh Pym looks at why he was allowed to go on operating for so long and what lessons the NHS should learn.
The Heart of England NHS Trust, which runs Solihull Hospital, was severely criticised over its handling of Ian Patterson and complaints against him. An official report highlighted poor performance, what it described as weak and indecisive leadership, and a culture of secrecy. Sir Ian Kennedy, who carried out the review in 2013, told the BBC the NHS still had many lessons to learn.
There's a very significant need for training in leadership amongst senior executives so that they can take on the powerful, charismatic, charming, apparently highly successful operator and address with the right level of moral courage what's going on.
The Kennedy Review set out the timetable and a series of warnings and failings. Back in 1996, Ian Patterson was suspended by a previous employer, but in 1998 he was appointed at the Heart of England NHS Trust. In 2004, an internal report on his conduct was ignored. There were further warnings, but it wasn't till 2011 that he was excluded by the Trust and 642 patients were recalled. The following year, he was suspended by the regulator, the General Medical Council. The review author says there's a clear message for the boards of NHS trusts.
They need to look at their culture to see whether it's interested and putting at the forefront the care of patients rather than the care of the staff, looking after the buildings, managing the money. They're all important, but the most important is the patient.
It's the summer when I was 16.
Patterson's victims weren't just in the NHS. Jade was just 16 when she was referred privately to the surgeon. Her family had health insurance. She had 4 operations removing lumps from her breasts. Later she was told that 3 of them were unnecessary.
It's anger, it's sad, it's shock that you can't believe that a man of his kind of calibre has put somebody through something like that so unnecessarily.
Questions have been raised about the level of scrutiny of procedures in private hospitals. One senior surgeon told me the private sector still had work to do.
No matter what the quality of surgery is in the private sector, there is much less observation going on and much less recording of detail than there is in the NHS.
Health service practices have been tightened, with surgeons working in teams who can hold them to account. The NHS Trust and the private hospitals where Ian Patterson worked have apologised. but legal action has been launched by some victims of the rogue surgeon. More may yet come forward. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Police investigating an active terrorist plot carried out an armed raid on a house in northwest London last night. One woman was shot and seriously injured. 6 others have been arrested. The Metropolitan Police say they are trying to contain a growing number of threats. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford reports.
Just before 7 last night, masked armed police officers at a North London flat firing CS gas canisters into the front window.
I ran to my partner in the kitchen. I was like, quick, quick, there's armed officers outside, there's armed officers. At that point you heard another bang, another bang.
Video obtained by The Sun shows some of those arrested in the flat being led away, and then a woman who was shot by police during the counter-terrorism raid being treated on the pavement.
There was a woman brought out of the house. She was on the ground, face down. Officers on top of her, ambulance officers around. She was screaming incredibly loud. It was quite awful. And the police were just saying, if you could just stay still, we'll help you. If you just need to be still, and we'll help you.
Police said the flat had been under observation in an investigation into a suspected plot against the UK.
The armed entry was necessary due to the nature of the intelligence we were dealing with, and involved armed officers firing CS gas into the address. During the course of that operation, one of the subjects, a woman, was shot by police. She remains in hospital.
In all, 6 people were arrested, including one in Kent. 3 women, 2 men and a 16-year-old boy. And that doesn't include the woman in hospital who'll be arrested once she's well enough. And the extraordinary events here last night came just a few hours after the arrest of a man in Whitehall, just a few yards from Downing Street. He is Khaled Mohammed Omar Ali, the BBC exclusively revealed today. He's still being held on suspicion of terrorism and carrying knives. He's not linked to last night's arrests. Khaled Mohammed Omar Ali is 27. He's British but was born overseas and went to school in Tottenham in North London. He was arrested after being stopped and searched in what police called an intelligence-led operation. This included a tip-off from family members.
It is very difficult for the police and the security services, hard as they work to keep ahead of the terrorist threat. They depend hugely on cooperation from the public. There are many cases in which the first leads have been given by the public, and those leads have led to developed intelligence. That is the way in which terrorists are caught.
This afternoon, police could be seen at a North London property linked to Ali, where forensics officers were searching the garden. 7 years ago, he was involved in a controversial convoy delivering aid to Gaza. Tonight, he's still in custody, but has not yet been charged. It's been another incredibly busy week for Scotland Yard's Counter-Terrorism Command, and one which shows the huge range of things they're now expected to do. Intelligence gathering, stopping suspects on the street using armed officers, raiding houses, wearing gas masks, using CS gas and live weapons. And if their intelligence is correct, then they've stopped 2 attacks on the UK in just 2 days. 2 days that have ended with 7 suspects in custody and 1 in hospital. Sophie.
Daniel, thank you. The UK economy slowed more than expected at the start of this year, with consumers tightening their belts in the face of rising inflation. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show growth slowing because of falling retail sales and a jump in living costs. The economy expanded by 0.3% from January to March. That's down from growth of 0.7% in the final quarter of 2016. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity has the details.
This sector is now the bright spot of our economy. This Shrewsbury-based manufacturer makes internal parts for cars from Land Rovers to the Nissan Qashqai. The drop in the value of the pound before and after the Brexit vote should have helped business a lot, because it's cheaper for foreign buyers paying dollars or euros to buy the cars that these parts go into. But even here, new orders aren't growing as quickly as they did a year ago.
There's potential customers with orders who are saying, look, let's just wait for 12 months and see what happens with Brexit, see what happens with tariffs, see whether we can buy from the UK or buy from Europe. And what we're saying is, look, we will continue to invest, we will continue to grow. What we need is a bit more commitment from the government to get the deal done.
This company's customers, the car makers, could be investing more to meet demand. But their ultimate customers are consumers. And in this country at least, consumer spending is slowing down.
What is a matter of concern for businesses is that if the consumer starts to give way because of pressures from inflation on consumers' ability to spend more in the high street, then that could hold back business investment. And that could be the beginning of a broader slowdown.
That message wasn't lost on the politicians on the campaign trail, who each had their own take on how serious the slowdown was.
Britain's economy is forecast to grow at 2% this year. Employment is at record highs and it's set to go higher still. The British economy is resilient.
Well, it's shocking because it comes on top of the figures around inflation going up and earnings stagnating. I think it's really worrying for the average household in our country now. It does show you, though, why Theresa May has gone for this early election, because the economy is now on the turn.
For years, consumer spending has been the motor of economic growth, but now we're hitting the brakes. Interest rates are as low as they've ever been and consumers are borrowing more. But a fundamental problem has returned to haunt us. Prices, once again, are going up faster than wages. A key measure of whether we're getting better off is the value of the economy per person, also known as GDP per head. That dropped after the financial crisis and only recently got back above its 2008 level. In the first 3 months of this year, it grew by just 0.1%. To political opponents in the election campaign, that's significant.
I mean, I think the GDP figures should be setting alarm bells ringing, and it underlines the importance of making sure that there are voices there arguing for a common sense outcome.
The figures are ominous, and they do suggest that the way the British economy has been kept afloat since the Brexit vote, with a lot of consumer spending supported by credit, high house prices, that this is not really sustainable.
If you're an optimist, the shift from consumer spending to manufacturing is welcome, a rebalancing the previous government tried but failed to achieve. But that won't be much comfort to households whose real incomes, once again, are shrinking. Andy Verity, BBC News.
Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar is in Westminster for us now. How much of an impact could these figures have on the election campaign?
Well, Brexit supporters, who obviously now include the Prime Minister, took comfort from the way the economy bore up after the vote to leave. And now the state of the economy is heading back towards the centre of the ring, where it tends to end up at election time. Over and over again, the economy is right there, of course, centre stage. The opposition have been given something to go on, as we saw in Andy's report. And you can add to that, inflation may be edging up and wage growth may be slowing down. And these things touch people in their pockets and in their daily lives. But remember too, the government is scoring very highly for economic trust, and in the minds of a lot of Tories that chimes with the theme that the Prime Minister is playing so deliberately and so regularly. You'd almost think that Theresa May was practicing the phrase strong and stable leadership each night to the beat of a metronome. Now, in 1997, you will remember, the Labour Party won a landslide victory to the accompaniment of the phrase set to music, things can only get better. Well, now it's possible things will get worse before the economy picks up again. Theresa May hopes to win a landslide for herself, and some will argue that this is all one of the reasons why the snap election has been called now. In the end, Sophie, it'll be up to the voters to decide on the wisdom of that decision.
John Pienaar, thank you. Some of the day's other news stories now, and a man has been charged with murder after a former Royal Navy officer was hit by his own car when he tried to stop thieves stealing it. Mike Samwell died outside his house in Manchester in the early hours of Sunday morning. Ryan Gibbons, who is 29, will appear before magistrates tomorrow morning. Researchers say a scheme to improve access to the latest cancer drugs in England didn't help many patients and was a huge waste of money. A report by King's College London found that the Cancer Drugs Fund, which ran from 2010 until last year, cost more than £1 billion. Vauxhall has been accused of showing a reckless disregard for safety over the way it handled a series of fires on its Zafira B model. MPs from the Transport Select Committee said the car maker was too slow to act and allowed people to drive cars that were a hazard. Now, Donald Trump swept to victory, promising to make America great again. The first 100 days of his presidency have been anything but boring or slow. Critics say he hasn't delivered on campaign pledges, such as repealing his predecessor's healthcare policies or building a wall along the border with Mexico. But his supporters point to America's withdrawal from trade deals and President Trump's hardline stance on so-called Islamic State. Our North America correspondent Nick Bryant has revisited the key campaign state of Ohio to ask voters what they think of the Trump presidency so far.
When we visited the Ohio River Valley last summer, this stretch of water was suffering a slow and agonizing death. But since Donald Trump became president, locals have seen a dramatic and instant turnaround, a Rust Belt revival. Coal barges are full again, partly because of the relaxation of environmental regulations. 150 boats now work this part of the river, compared to just 25 last year. Back then, Bob Harrison told us America needed a businessman as president, and in 25 years, he's never seen such a turnaround.
Like the switch was turned on. We're busy, and we got more stuff going on, and our business has dramatically picked up.
And you think that's the Trump effect?
Yes, like I talked to different people. We talked about, call it the Trump bump and that. So it's been good for us.
Last summer in the town of Clinton, Pennsylvania, we came across this huge Trump sign erected by a one-time Democrat, Mike Lieber. Now it's been put away in the barn, but not through embarrassment. If anything, his admiration for Donald Trump has grown.
Just speaking with people, they're more upbeat. They feel like the government isn't on their back. Feels like they're jackboot of the government's off their neck. So it gives them a chance to thrive.
He promised to revive regions like this. Do you think he's doing that?
Yes, I do.
Push him off, push him off, push him off. It was Trump's hothead temperament that put off American football coach Bill Timko when we spoke to him last year.
He's bombastic. He's obscene, and I don't like the guy.
Now not only a change of sport, but a change of opinion. In these first 100 days, Trump has won him over.
Well, I've changed my mind because he made campaign promises and he came through. And, that's what you want. You want to see that the guy is going to do what he said he's going to do.
What about Twitter?
He needs to stay off of that. I mean, that gets him in a lot of trouble.
Good. A Republican who voted for Hillary Clinton, Amber Thompson, was a staunch Trump critic and remains so, but nonetheless applauds his decision to strike Syria.
Even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes. I believe that Trump's response to the chemical attack in Syria was 100% correct. And I hope that putting pressure on the Russians and the Assad regime will help to bring an end to this war. I hope that Syria will be Donald Trump's nut.
Donald Trump has been suffering from historically low approval ratings, but in this rundown region, we didn't find much evidence of buyer's remorse.
President Trump has been much like candidate Trump. And while that's horrified liberals in America's major cities who regard him as a national embarrassment, here in the Rust Belt he is still widely viewed as a potential national savior.
Two Trumps, two Americas. But the region that won him the presidency remains a stronghold. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Ohio.
Well, that is what the voters think. But what about the president himself? Our North America editor John Sopel is in Washington, and President Trump has been giving us an idea of how he's found the first 100 days.
Yeah, Sophie, President Trump isn't a man much given to self-doubt, so I'm sure he would probably give himself very high marks for this period. But a fascinating interview he gave to the Reuters news agents where he said, "This is more work than in my previous life. I thought it would be easier." Well, the sheer complexity of being president has been brought home to him in very short order in his dealings with Congress, where he failed to get his healthcare reforms through, the travel ban from those mainly Islamic countries, that hasn't gone through. There have been other setbacks as well. But by sheer force of personality, determination, there is a rising sense of economic confidence. That is manifested in the rising stock market, and people who've got savings or their money in a pension pot have seen the value of that go up. And that is making a lot of Americans feel very good. And you can also look at the complexity of dealing with foreign affairs. Things that he said that would be simple when it was candidate Trump now look a lot more complicated now that it is President Trump. Whether it's Syria, which was nothing to do with the US, and there have been the airstrikes, whether it was NATO, which was obsolete but is now seen as key, and look at the engagement that there is now in all sorts of other things. North Korea, most notably. He said he'd rip up the deals with Iran and with the NAFTA countries, Mexico and Canada. That hasn't happened either. America is still divided, but on one thing, America is united. There's never been 100 days like this.
John Sopel, thank you. One of the biggest bouts in British boxing history will take place at Wembley Stadium tomorrow night. More than 90,000 people are expected to be there to watch British heavyweight Anthony Joshua take on the Ukrainian Vladimir Klitschko, one of the most decorated heavyweights of his era. Yet Joshua, who only turned professional after the London Olympics, is the favourite to win. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks reports on one of the most eagerly anticipated contests for years.
One's the young world champion who's brought integrity back to heavyweight boxing. The other's the elder statesman who's been the man to beat for 19 years. But in a build-up free of histrionics, the tone has been distinctly more intelligent.
Obsession is love in an extreme shape. So it's basically I'm in love with my goal.
He's obsessed, he's got passion, he's in love. So when I do defeat him, I like people say, you know what, I faced the best man possible. And a man that's coming off defeat is the best man because you learn from your mistakes. And I think that's why I'm looking forward to the challenge.
With just 18 pro fights under his belt, though, Joshua concedes 14 years of experience to the erudite 41-year-old, a man whose camp he joined as a youngster to learn from the Olympic gold medalist. Joshua, of course, went on to become one himself. Is Klitschko too much too soon? Plenty want to know the answer. The audience of 90,000 here inside Wembley Stadium will break post-war boxing records. The fight will be watched in more than 140 countries, and in Britain alone, more than 1 million people are expected to pay to watch it. The fight could generate up to £60 million, which would mean for Anthony Joshua that come Sunday morning, he could be £15 million richer. The world may well be watching, but Joshua's mum won't be.
Honestly, I've hit people before, and I admire the shot because I have the best seat in the house, you know, and that's why I don't want my mum to be that close to seeing her son go through war.
She's important in your
She's
life.
important, yeah, she's important. Let's keep a smile on her face. You know, I can't remember the last time I see her cry or worried, and I'd like to keep it that way.
She might well be about to miss a career-ending fight for Klitschko and a career-defining one for her son. Natalie Perks, BBC News, Wembley.
That's it from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night and enjoy the bank holiday weekend. Bye-bye.